16, issue traffic advisories. There are several ways you can issue traffic advisories. First, we're going to define it. Advisories issued to alert pilots to other known or observed air traffic which may be in such proximity to the position or intended route of flight of the aircraft to warrant their attention. Such advisories may be advised on. First one's going to be a visual observation. That's your visual observation out the window to see the relation of that aircraft to another aircraft. You can also do it via radar identification. That's going to be observed of radar identified and non-radar identified targets on ATC radar display. So what that means for a radar identified aircraft, that's going to be an aircraft that you're talking to that you know is there. For example, here, you're talking to this aircraft here. You know that aircraft's position in relation to another aircraft, and you're going to issue traffic accordingly to those two aircraft as needed. Non-identified targets is going to include something that could happen at Edwards and happens at other places where you have an aircraft that's not supposed to be in your vicinity, or Sport didn't tell you they're in your vicinity, your radar facility did not tell you, but they're there anyway. You don't know the type of aircraft it is, you don't know what he's doing, and so you're going to issue traffic because you observed them on radar, but you're not identified them. They haven't been inbounded from Sport. You haven't verified that aircraft is actually there. All you have is a readout on your radar display saying there's an aircraft in that vicinity. In that case, you'd have to issue traffic. For example, traffic heading to your left at 4,000 heading northwest bound, unknown identified aircraft. And so that way they understand that there's aircraft in that vicinity. You're not talking to, you don't know anything about him, what he's doing, just what he appears to be based on your radar. The next one's going to be pilot reported. For instance, we could have a situation where our radar might go out of service, and then you have to go 100% off of pilot reports. Or they could lose their transponder. If an aircraft loses its transponder, you might be in a situation where you cannot see him on the rehost. This happens commonly with certain models of F-35s during certain testing. But you might have them fall off the radar completely. They may lose some sort of transponder issue, and then you have to rely 100% on radar reports. In this example that I'm showing you here, you have number 1, Cobra 38 coming down final. You've already sequenced Cobra 21 on a south reentry to the TAC end to follow. And the next thing you know, you get an inbound. Maybe you previously knew about him from Sport before you had radar issues, or maybe Raptor all of a sudden falls off your radar display. And he checks in, and now you don't have any visualization on him at all. So all you have is this. Tower Raptor 11, 5 miles north of the TAC end, first straight in. What are you going to do? How are you going to sequence him to the pattern? He wants a straight in. There's several things you could do with him. One, just visualizing in your mind. You know the F-16, last you heard had not, or last you had visualized, has not turned yet. You can ask first thing off, Cobra 21, say current position. He might come back and say something like outbound on the south reentry being the TAC end. At that point, I probably would say continue outbound, traffic inbound from the north, F-22. And then go back to that F-22, establish initial contact with him, tell him to report the TAC end. And then once he reports the TAC end, you know at that point he's no longer a factor. You can bring Cobra 21 in. The other thing you could do is send Raptor 11 to initial and let Cobra 21 turn base his discretion, verifying he has the T-38 in sight. The point is you may need to do way more position reports with aircraft to say, hey, look, where are you? I don't see you. My radar is down. That's probably one of the first things I would tell them is that my radar is out of service. Stay position. And that way you can sequence based on aircraft's report until you can see them visually outside the window. The traffic we're going to use to issue traffic is you're going to use either radar traffic advisories or any radar or any manner in which assists the pilot in recognition. If you're doing a radar traffic call, in this example, we have Ghost 11 Heavy KC-135 outbound on south reentry past the TAC end. And then you have Cobra 21 probably coming out of the west range, inbounded from Sport for a straight in. This is a scenario which is going to make sure that we have to issue traffic. Other than a normal scenario where you'd have maybe a VFR traffic call, this may not warrant that because they're not close enough to be able to issue maybe a pertinent VFR traffic call. But this is a good case where you're going to want to issue an IFR traffic call. So you're going to say something like Ghost 10 Heavy, traffic 1 o'clock, 3 miles, northwest bound F-16 descending through 6,500. I know it says defending, but it's descending. And then as soon as you read that to him, he'll probably say something either not in sight or searching. And then you go back to immediately to Cobra 2-1, traffic 10 o'clock, 3 miles, eastbound, heavy KC-135, 4,500 on a south reentry. You could also, if you wanted to be more controlling, is give it altitude restriction for Cobra 2-1 until he's either on final or past that traffic that you observe on the radar. But this is a standard IFR traffic call, and we would use this mostly when aircraft are not in the vicinity of the traffic pattern, but are outside the vicinity of the traffic pattern. For VFR traffic advisories, this is just an example. You might have Cobra 2-1 on the go for runway 23 left, and then you have Aris 16 Heavy on a south reentry in the departure end. That traffic call is going to be Cobra 2-1, traffic Heavy C-17, departure and south reentry, left close traffic approved. Again, you're going to give that traffic first, because as soon as you say close traffic approved, he may come back and ask you, tower, what's the C-17 doing? Which means that he may alter his course on departure, depending on what's happening, if he feels uncomfortable at all. Sometimes aircraft may be lower than this, but they're transitioning to the south reentry from the southwest, and so it may be in his line of view, especially being a bigger aircraft. They appear to be larger or closer than they actually are. The next call you would make immediately would be Cobra 2-1, traffic Heavy C, or additional traffic you can make. If you don't want to say their position in the relation to the pattern where he's at right now. So the Heavy C-17 is a beam the departure in for a south reentry. If you don't want to use that call, you can be a little bit less specific and just general enough for the aircraft to just look in that direction. And that traffic advisory would be Cobra 2-1, traffic Heavy C-17 off your left wing, left close traffic approved. Either one is okay. Either one works. It just depends on where the aircraft is, if they can see them in that certain point in time or not. In this scenario, he'd be able to look off his left wing and he'd be right there. He could see him. If the aircraft was maybe a little bit farther towards the midfield, off your left wing wouldn't be probably the best. You could say traffic Heavy C-17 midfield south reentry. Traffic, the next one we're going to talk about is phraseology to inform aircraft. Let me back up. For traffic no longer a factor, if you had issued traffic, let's say in the example, in this scenario, say Ghost 11 Heavy never sees the Cobra, but Cobra passes him, he's on final. Now it's not a factor, you need to let him know. Traffic no longer a factor, that's required. We're required to issue traffic until the aircraft either has him in sight or is no longer a factor. If the aircraft reports him in sight, you just say Roger. If the traffic's no longer a factor, you have to specifically say traffic no longer observed. Sometimes you might have numerous traffic that you gave him about. Maybe there is another aircraft that's off the right wing that was flying in a lower altitude, but now he's higher and it's no longer a factor for him. That would be, you'd have to give him multiple. So traffic at your 1 o'clock no longer a factor if Cobra 2-1 was passed, but he may have additional traffic. So it kind of depends on the scenario for that. Next thing we're going to explain when is required to issue numerous aircraft in the vicinity of your location. In this scenario, at least at Edwards, what we could have is multiple aircraft inbound from the southwest for downwinds or south reentries. And what you do is you give them the instruction that you want to give them to get them into your pattern, and then you'd issue traffic. You could try to be more restrictive and give them certain altitude restrictions, but you get dangerous with that with VFR aircraft because most likely these aircraft are higher than your Class D. And then at that point, you don't have a lot of vertical space to start giving multiple set altitude restrictions. So it's much better in this scenario to say, report left downwind, traffic, multiple aircraft in your vicinity. That way you kind of give them their head on a swivel, and at that point they're still VFR. If you can give you more traffic than that, then that's great, but sometimes you may have multiple aircraft in your traffic pattern, and then you get inbounded these 3 aircraft, and you got to say something. So that's when you would use something like multiple aircraft in the vicinity. We can talk more about this via dry erase board if you guys want more explanation. Vehicles on the edge of the runways. So in this scenario, I put now what you would say verbally to the vehicles that are going to be up to but not on the runway or at the edge of the runway. It could be vehicles, it could be men and equipment working, but there's set phraseology for that. Often we mess this up and we'll say vehicles right side of runway 23 left, wind calm, clear for takeoff. However, right side of runway gives the illusion to the pilots or the misconception that there may be vehicles on the runway, but on the right side. Instead, a better approach would be say vehicles right of runway approach end, right of runway midfield, departure in, left of runway approach in, left of runway midfield, left of runway departure in. And so what happens if they're right here in this general vicinity? What would you say? It's still, that's kind of up to you. You can try to give them a distance remaining marker. However, the pilots aren't going to look out there and look specifically for that unless it's a factor for them. If it's on this side of the halfway line between the midfield and the approach in the runway, personally, I would say approach end still. If it's on that side of it, I would say midfield. It's not so specific because you're telling the aircraft that the vehicles are off the runway. The most importantly is just let them know that there's not going to be any surprises, that you didn't forget about a vehicle on the runway. And as they start departure roll, they see a vehicle at the edge of the runway and then they freak out. And then they power down and try to slow down as fast as possible. That's a situation we don't want. So we always want to make sure the aircraft understand that there's vehicles up to but not on, or right of the runway or left of the runway. Next, we're going to talk about issuing traffic advisories using the Certified Tower Radar Display, or the CTIRD, as everybody calls it. At Edwards Air Force Base, we have the ability to issue radar traffic calls because we have a certified tower radar display. So you can use standard traffic calls that are in the paragraph 2-1-21 traffic advisories, which is the radar traffic calls that we already previously talked about. That pretty much concludes task 16. We'll get to expand upon this during our live session as we need to. But now I'm going to get into your homework. All right, your homework is going to be issuing traffic advisories. So what you're going to do is I have listed all of these out here in the normal traffic pattern. So this is a normal rectangular pattern. This aircraft will be at departure in downwind, midfield downwind, approach in downwind, and base. Aircraft's on the go. And so I put all these aircraft in different places as if aircraft were here. And so what I want you to do is I want you to see how you would say where that traffic is. And then I want you to refer to the next section. I'm going to send this out via email so you have the physical copy of this. But I wrote down how you should say it. Traffic, whatever type of aircraft it is, left departure and downwind. The reason we want to say left departure and downwind is because now that we use runway 23 right and 23 left, we really need to get in the habit of letting aircraft know which downwind they're on. You could say left departure and downwind runway 23 left. However, since we don't typically run right downwinds for 23 left and left downwinds for 23 right when we're on runway 23. We run north and south downwinds so the aircraft stay apart from each other. If you issued left downwind, departure and downwind for runway 23 left, that's fine. So again, I wrote down here exactly how we should say this to all these different aircraft, or a suggestion of how we should say it in the most minimalist phraseology as possible. And so 10 times, I want you to go through all of these in order and issue those traffic. So for example, I would say traffic, or you could say follow, depending on what you want to do. I would recommend maybe even both, but 10 times each. Traffic F-16 departure and downwind. Traffic T-38 midfield downwind. Traffic C-12 approach in left downwind. Traffic F-16 approach in left base. Traffic F-16 on the go runway 23 left. Traffic 1 mile off the departure in crosswind runway 23 left. And so on and so forth. You just go through this whole list, compare your how you would say it with how I've listed it here, and try to reduce that verbiage as much as possible. Again, I want you to do it 10 times per aircraft. And I don't want you to do it in a row. I don't want you to do number 1 10 times. I want you to go through the list over and over again, 1 through 14, or 1 through 15, saying them over and over again 10 times. The next one's going to be south re-entry calls, re-entry calls. These are aircraft on the south re-entry and how they get back to final, and aircraft on the north re-entry and how they get back to final. I specifically left normal Edwardsisms out of this. So this traffic here, instead of being East Lake Shore or base East Lake Shore, I put left 5 mile left base. The reason why that's good for us to get in the habit of is because when you go to your next base, you may not have that VFR reporting point. And so it's good for you to get used in the habit of saying a mileage base. Instead of base abeam the tachyon, you'd say 7 mile left base. Again, I want you to do these 10 times in order. And here's again the listed phraseology that I recommend. And that's it. Thanks for watching task 16, and have a good one.